Well, in such beautiful weather here in the middle of summer, when life is easy and times are good, you can think of some of those country and western songs, with my feet in the sand and my whatever tail and the whatever it is and something else in my hand. Some of the famous country songs, talk about this, but I don't want to talk about good times. No, that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about anxiety. What does God say about it, and how should we deal with it? Anxiety, there are those people that say this is the age of anxiety. If you just look at the news this week and look at a little bit at some of the pictures, look what's going on in Egypt. The planes going out of Cairo airport are full of people putting their families on, their wives and their children, and people trying to get out of the country from that standpoint, because they've had a coup d'etat. I know the government here doesn't want to say coup d'etat because that is a dirty word that actually has legal implications, meaning they'd have to cut off the $3 billion they're giving the Egyptian military every year. But anyways, to make the point, if you're in Cairo or if you're in Egypt, any place in Egypt, there's probably somebody, there's a tank on downtown, a couple tanks, and the guy is sitting there with machine guns, and your whole life has been thrown up in the air, but then things were bad before. I mean, the price of your gasoline was just going out of the roof, the food prices and everything else. Work was disappearing. Oh, and speak about work, it's just not the Middle East, whether you're talking about Egypt or Syria, which is a total mess, or thinking about all the bombings that are still going on in Iraq and the turmoil that's still there in Libya. No, we could go to Europe a little closer, where 25% of the population, the working age population, can't find work. They're laid off. They've lost their jobs in a variety of different countries. Several of the countries in the southern part of Europe, and over half the young people in those countries, there's no work. There's absolutely no work. They're having to go to different countries, within the EU, or even come over here to Canada and other places to find work, because it's just that hard pressed. It's difficult. And even here in the United States, the debt is still going up. The Federal Reserve is still buying $85 billion worth of the government bonds that they can't sell anyplace else. The Federal Reserve is buying them up, okay? 85 billion bucks gets loaded on to the national debt, which is over 100% in the United States. And we're not far behind in Canada. Canada's always just a little behind the United States. We're, not quite as bad, but we're on the same path, generally speaking. But we have all those mega problems, if you want to call it the meta problems that affect our lives. But then there are also the personal problems. We can be anxious. If you're a man, an older man, maybe you go to the doctor and he does a little test and he comes back with an elevated level of PSAs. Talk about anxious. Or a woman, you feel a lump in your breast. Some of these things, we have the anxiety, or maybe you're just plain anxious getting on the road. You've been creamed a few times on the road and maybe you're nervous about it. Maybe you're being hauled into court for one reason or another, or you're having to go to court to sue somebody to do what they ought to have done. Life is full of anxiety. I can tell you this, that, and the other. Hanging on to a job, having family, working with kids, your own health, I suppose we can be anxious about a lot of things, because obviously we're not getting out of this alive, are we? No. So when we look at this, there's a tremendous amount of things in our modern life that we can be anxious for. Let's go to Matthew, Gospel of Matthew 6:25. I hope you were thinking about that immediately when I was talking about this. But if we go to the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 6 and verse 25, and I'm going to read this in the English Standard Version, the ESV, Jesus said this. He told this to his disciples. That means this is his advice to you and to me. He said, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Or yada, 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 all the other stuff that we have in this modern life. You know, the word Jesus used here, and which Matthew wrote down in the original inspired text for anxious, is Strong's 3309, MERIMNAÓ, MERIMNAÓ. And where does MERIMNAÓ come from? You know, its origin is from Strong's, logically, 3308, you know, from this standpoint. It's MERIMNA. So MERIMNAÓ, what Jesus was using, comes from MERIMNA. You know, it's right next there as far as being listed in the lexicon. But it means apart, as opposed to a whole. Think of anxiousness in that way, as apart, as opposed from the whole. That lexicon says properly it's like being drawn in opposite directions, or divided into parts. You're being divided into pieces. A.T. Robertson put it figuratively, to go to pieces. You know, the anxiety, to go to pieces, because you're being pulled apart in different directions, like the force being exerted by a sort of a sinful anxiety and worry. Yes, MERIMNAÓ is the old verb for worry and anxiety, literally to be divided, to be distracted. It's like you're only seeing, all of a sudden, suddenly, spiritually speaking, you're only seeing part of the picture. You're being divided, you're being pulled apart. Therefore, I tell you, Jesus said, do not be anxious about your life. Don't be anxious about it. According to the online Merriam-Webster, you know, and you look at anxiety, because they're different, you start looking around, different people have different understandings of anxiety, but Merriam-Webster says that anxiety is that painful or apprehensive uneasiness of mind, usually over an impending or anticipated ill or problem. You're uneasy, you're apprehensive, you have a concern, a fearful concern or interest. Something is being threatened, something is coming up. You're apprehensive, you're uneasy about it. Now, that is the primary definition of anxiety, but a secondary version of anxiety, and this is oftentimes what is used by psychologists, and they're going to talk about an abnormal or overwhelming sense of apprehension that's usually marked by physiological stuff like sweating, tension, increased pulse. Of course, the police use this anxiety, you know, when they strap you into the old machines, you know, that measure your blood pressure, you know, whether you're a lie detector, whether you're telling the truth or something, or they put you under pressure for some of these things. Yeah, they look to create a little anxiety in somebody to get out of them what they want. Anxiety is oftentimes, however, when we look at it from our own perspective, it's a doubt concerning the reality and nature of what's happening to us and what the situation is. And we have all these self-doubts about our ability to, or capacity even to cope with it. If you're a young person and you're going into a test, you may have anxiety because you're wondering, am I going to be able to regurgitate all this stuff that they want, you know, that the professor is going to want? I remember very distinctly in university, you know, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of detailed university level stuff that you were going to be accountable for, and a slew of lectures, and you had to know it all. And not only did you have to know it, you had to explain it. If they asked you questions and you had to do something with it, you had to explain it and make a point with it. And which part of this is he going to give you? This is why studying could lead to a little bit of anxiety before the examination. You know, in some cases, however, anxiety can be, some people will use the word, or they define the word as they'll use it as a needless doubt, But in many cases, you know, most of what we face in life is not needless doubts. The word anxiety in our modern language was first used, think about this, was first used and first appeared in text in 1525 in Europe. Now, what was going on in Europe in 1525 in Germany? Well, I tell you, talk about anxiety. The whole old order of what people had thought of Christendom to be, with the Catholic Church ensconced and, running the whole thing all over Europe, was being broken up by the Protestant Reformation. And there was upheaval, there was tension, there was violence, and everybody was being put on the spot. But along with all of that anxiety, there was the, which you might say was a negative sort, or the pressure, there was also the anxiety because there was the opportunity for something new. There's opportunity to take some individual action of something that you could actually do, to have a fresh look at the scriptures, to look at what you believed. Yeah, that can create anxiety. There are a lot of people in this world right now who don't want to listen to what the scriptures have to say, okay, because it may create in them a certain sense of anxiety, and they want to avoid that at all possible costs. Well, that's not necessarily good, is it? No, it's not. We have to have, there's sometimes you meet anxiety face on with faith. Now, I was curious because, of course, what I have just been talking to you about is what I got, it's online. It's the most current, understanding of anxiety. But I decided to go a little deeper to say, well, has our understanding of anxiety changed a little bit? And it has. Surprisingly, I got out my mother's old dictionary. Now, this is a 1942 Funk and Wagnalls. A 1942 Funk and Wagnalls. At this point in time, that's 71 years ago that this dictionary was printed. And this was the World War II edition of Funk and Wagnalls. The Funk and Wagnalls had a different little take on this than the Merriam-Webster, and at that point in time in World War II, in the dark depths, 1942 was really when the Allies were at their worst point, and the Axis were winning the war. The Nazis and the Japanese militarists were winning the war at that point in time. They talked about anxiety as referring to some future event, always suggesting a hopeful possibility. And they pointed out, the Funk and Wagnalls, that it differed from apprehension, fear, dread, foreboding, terror, because all of those things can be quite despairing, they said. It can be things that, stop us from doing things. It just it mobilizes us, okay? But anxiety, if we have the right form of anxiety, it shouldn't do this. In matters that are within our reach, within our power to exercise some sort of option or opinion or control over it, anxiety should always stir up in us the question of whether something can be done and whether something should be done. And should we do something about it? There should be a positive motion to this. This is what the dictionary in the Funk and Wagnalls in 1942 was saying. There's also this sense, here I'm looking at the Merriam-Webster, which is the latest online version in the internet age, and then the Funk and Wagnalls during the World War II age. This sense of hopeful possibility in the definition of the English word anxiety was also found in the ancient Greek word for anxiety, MERIMNAÓ. That's Strong's 3309. And the Apostle Paul used it from a positive perspective to promote the effectiveness of the church, the effectiveness in the members of the church, because he understood that if we deal with anxiety in a good way, we have to look out from ourselves and we have to look into others. If we go to 1 Corinthians, let's go to the epistle of Paul in 1 Corinthians. We'll go to 1 Corinthians and we'll go to chapter 12, 1 Corinthians 12, and we'll go to verse 25. I want to show you this directly where he used MERIMNAÓ, anxiety, okay, from this. And let's go to verse 25. Verse 20, 2 Corinthians, that's not going to help me. 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 25. So Paul is talking about the whole body and the parts of all the different things, the different members being different parts of the body of what they can contribute. And why is this? What is it that each member in the body of Christ is contributing? In verse 25 it says this, and I'll quote first from the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So what is it everybody is doing is so that there would be no division in the body, but the members would have the same concern for each other. So in the Greek, where it says, so that there would be no division in the body, but the members would have, in the Greek word here is anxiety. It's Strong's 3309, MERIMNAÓ. May have, okay, that the members would be anxious in their care for, that the members would be anxious, they would have anxiety in their care for, for each other. And actually, you know, the strange thing is it's kind of hard to put into English the Greek idiom, because they're using the word anxious twice. That the members would have this anxiousness to have the anxious concern for each other. You know, it's kind of strange to sound in English, but in the original Greek text that Paul wrote, he used MERIMNAÓ twice in this one verse. The Young's literal translation puts it this way, and putting it into English, and they only will do it once here just because it's not the way our English mind normally likes to have things presented. And the Young's literal translation, 1 Corinthians 12:25, goes this way, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same anxiety for each other. Okay, in the Church of God, we should have the same anxiety for each other. Now, I do have some friends, you know, this is their strong suit. This is their strong suit, you know, that they are concerned and they are anxious for each other. And that's good. And another place where Paul uses anxiety, MERIMNAÓ, Strong's 3309, in a positive way in promoting this effective distributing concern about the well-functioning of the church. Let's go to Philippians. Let's go to the book, the epistle of Paul to the Philippian brethren. So let's go to Philippians. And let's go to chapter 2, and we will go to verse 20. Philippians 2 and verse 20, where it says here in the Holman Christian Standard Bible, for I have no one else like-minded, or as the Greek would put it, you look in the original Greek, who is of a kindred spirit with me. Okay, I have no one who is like-minded, who is a kindred spirit, who will genuinely care about, be anxious, okay, MERIMNAÓ, who will be anxious for your interests. So he was talking in this particular case, he was sending one of his co-workers who was a kindred spirit, because this person would have the same sort of anxious care for their interest, would really be concerned, So you see here very clearly that Paul was using this verb that we translate into English as anxiety, MERIMNAÓ. He was using it from a positive standpoint, okay? As again, you know, this is one of the things, we can have a positive, if the anxious care is for others, it's for the good of others, it's for the operation of the church, it's for each other. It can be a positive thing in using it from that standpoint. It can be, but however, this is a sentiment, on the other hand, that can be easily transformed into a sense of apprehension, fear, dread, foreboding, and terror, especially if we start going to pieces. If, say, you know, we just get a part of the picture and not the whole picture. Because, and the reason why, of course, things like apprehension, fear, dread, foreboding, and terror are so negative, or why, is because they commonly incapacitate the person who has them from any helpful thought or behavior. They don't take action. They don't deal with the problem. That's why terrorists like what they do. You know, it just scares the daylights out of people. They don't, can't take action to deal with it. That's why you've had, regimes like the Nazis or whatever, and they exercise terror. To control other people, to incapacitate them from resisting their oppression. Now, Jesus also used the Greek word MERIMNAÓ, Strong's 3309, in a negative way. Okay, he did use it in a negative way here in Matthew 6:25, because Jesus was cautioning us very clearly not to be drawn in opposing directions and being divided into a part. He was cautioning us not, in other words, in a different place in Scripture, it talks about not being double-minded. Well, this is part of it. This is what anxiety can do. And we're not getting the big picture. Anxiety pulls us away so that, if in a negative sense, that we're not getting the big picture when it's used in this way. And this is how Jesus used it in Matthew 6. So let's go to Matthew 6:25, and I want to read over this passage of Scriptures. Now I'm going to read this in Young's literal translation. Young's literal translation, he is going, when Young did this, he's going to use an older English form. So I'll be speaking a little bit of Old English here for you, but it's a literal translation, which opposed to people who modify it a bit to appeal more to our modern sensibilities. Matthew 6:25. Because of this I say to you, be not anxious for your life, what ye may eat, what ye may drink, nor for your body, what ye may put on. Is not the life more than the nourishment, and the body more than the clothing? Look to the fowls of the heaven, for they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into storehouses, and your heavenly Father doth nourish them. Are not ye much better than they? And who of you, being anxious, is able to add to his age 1 cubit? In other words, we can't make ourselves live one more week than we're scheduled. And about clothing, why are ye anxious? Consider well the lilies of the field, how do they grow? They do not labor, nor do they spin. And I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed as one of these. And if the herb of the field that today is, and tomorrow is cast into the furnace, God doth so clothe, not much more you, O ye of little faith? Therefore ye may not be anxious. Okay, this is almost like a command from that standpoint. Therefore ye may not be anxious, saying, what may we eat, or what may we drink, or what may we put round? Okay, because in those days when you clothe yourselves, you put your clothing around you, right? In the nature, you'd wrap yourself from that standpoint. That's the original Greek. What may we put round? For all these do the nations seek. For your heavenly Father doth know that ye have need of all these. Yeah, God knows that, we're not in the Garden of Eden where we can walk around without any clothes and, just go out and grab, something off the tree. It doesn't work like that anymore, does it? Verse 33, but seek ye first the reign of God and his righteousness, and all these shall be added to you. Be not therefore anxious for the morrow shall be anxious for its own things. Sufficient for the day is the evil of it. Or in this last verse, as the New Living Translation would put it for us, so don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. Yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice. Every day, just picture, what's going to happen today. Now, many translations here in this passage in Matthew 6 are going to translate, instead of anxious or anxiety, they're going to use the word worry. But worry, the Funk and Wagnalls wouldn't make that switch, because according to the Funk and Wagnalls of 1942, worry is mere petty restless, manifested anxiety. Okay, it's something that you mouth off about. It's something you talk about. Worry is communicated to all who are around. But anxiousness can be far more profound because it can be quiet and it can be silent. It can be right in the depths of your soul. So they made a difference between it. And from that standpoint, when you have the modern translations put it in worry, they're sort of, dumbing down a little bit of the text. They're making it a little bit more superficial than it really is talking about. Jesus was talking about not being pulled to pieces, okay, over all this stuff, not being torn up about it, and not losing the sight of the big picture, just focusing on something immediate. That's what Jesus was getting to. And he liked this word, by the way. He used it. Let's go to Matthew 10:19. Matthew 10:19. I think he probably knew something about it because, after all, Jesus was living at a time when society there were different sects and groups of religious understanding of God's truth. They were under the thumb of the Roman Empire and were mere slaves. They had lost their, they were no longer full citizens. Their opinions really didn't count anymore. Sort of like today, we say we can vote, but what we think or our opinions, our political rulers, they get to see every election, whatever we vote, but otherwise it doesn't really matter. But Matthew 10:19, I'll read this in the ESV. Jesus also said this to his disciples: when they deliver you over, do not be anxious. MERIMNAÓ, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say. So you're hauled into court for something like that. Don't be anxious about, how you're going to speak or what you're going to say. For you are to say what is given you in that hour. When we're put on the spot to give a testimony of our faith in Jesus Christ, we can't be worried about that. And Jesus was saying at that time to these disciples who were going to be hauled into synagogues, before tribunals, before rulers, and have to give an account for what they believe. He said, don't be anxious. God will give it to you. God will be giving it to you. Don't be pulled apart about this. Don't just go to pieces. A lot of people, public speaking is their number one source of anxiety if they put on the spot and have to say something. Let's go to Matthew 13:22. A little farther. Jesus liked this word, MERIMNAÓ, anxiousness and anxious. Matthew 13:22, he uses it in this point, in the parable of the sower. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one, the sown among thorns, the parable, you understand what it is. The one that's sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world, the anxiety of the world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the work and it proves unfruitful. It's something we have to, as disciples, be very careful, because the anxiety of this world, everything we have can be stripped away from us. It's the way it is. We live in a society, This isn't our world. This isn't our kingdom. Everything we have can be stripped away from us. Even the clothes. They strip search you these days when they haul you in, Everything can be taken from us. But he says, don't worry about this. For what was sown among thorns is the one who hears the word, but the cares, the anxiety of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word and it proves unfruitful. So we can't have that sort of anxiety, being pulled to pieces, wanting something, wanting, this stuff, when it can all be taken away from us just like that. All the money in your bank account can turn into nothing overnight, or it can be frozen. All the accounts can be frozen. That's what the world we live in. People know that the currencies, the money we have, it's all worthless. It's only, it's this counting trick, that's going on, and it's this comparison. It's just a game we're playing right now. It's just a game. 1 Corinthians 7:32. Apostle Paul also used this, and I showed how he used it in positive, but he also uses it in a negative way of how anxiety can pull you to pieces, and to beware of that. In 1 Corinthians 7:32, Paul was saying to the brethren, I want you to be free from anxieties. Okay, he's making this point to the brethren. Now here is it was all question about whether do you get married, do you not get married. You know, the social situation was such in the Roman Empire at that particular point in time and among the brethren, it was very, very tough. And Paul was saying, I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. So here he's saying that, you know, he uses it in these two ways. He wants you to be free of this negative anxieties that pull you away, but he wants you to have this anxious care for the things of the Lord. Isn't that interesting? He's using it in both fashions, just turning it, you know, according to the context. Let's go to Luke 10:41. Luke 10:41. Anxiety, you know, the way Jesus used it, however, he used it mostly in the negative form. And Luke 10:41, but the Lord answered her, okay, we know this one, Martha, Martha, you are anxious, MERIMNAÓ, Strong's 3309, and troubled about many things. Okay, don't be anxious about many things, no. Instead, what? You're supposed to, you know, be like your sister. Martha, be like Mary. You know, she's focusing on the big picture. Don't just get stuck on a part of the picture. Focus on the big picture. And it's easy for us to get stuck in looking at, man, the world is falling apart. I'm falling apart. You know, whatever it might be. It's easy to get caught up in that and start to become anxious about some situation. It really is. And God understands this. Let's go to Psalms. Let's go to the book of Psalms. God understands this. Psalms 77. This is a psalm of Asaph. Let's turn to Psalms, the book of Psalms, Psalm 77. We'll start here with verse 1. Psalm 77:1. I cried to God with my voice. To God is my voice, and he gave ear to me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My hand was lifted up, and my tears ceased not in the night. My soul refused to be comforted. He was anxious for sure. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit fainted. He was being pulled to pieces. Selah, think about that. You keep my eyes awake. I am too troubled and I cannot speak. I have thought on the days of old, the years of past ages. I remember my song in the night. Because of course the Psalms were sung, and Asaph was one of the people who would sing in the temple. He was singing the Psalms, singing the praises to God, and here he is, he's in a situation where he is full of anxiety that's pulling him to pieces. And to deal with this, to get a hold of himself, he says, I remember my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? Seems like he's casting me off right now. Will the Lord cast off forever? Will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy gone forever? Has his word failed for all generations? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. Okay, let's think about that. And I said, this is my grief. Yeah, I've got all this anxiety that's pulling me to pieces. This is my grief. But I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I'm going to remember when God had it in his strength and he was working with his people. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. Everything that's written in these, he started to recall to him. Now here he is, Asaph, writing, during this period of time of in the United Monarchy in David, thinking back of the 400 years earlier, the Exodus, and how God had pulled the people out of Egypt and delivered them from slavery, and gave them the food and the drink in the desert when there was nothing there. I will think on all your work and talk of your doings. He's doing this, of course, in this and talking to others. He's being part of the body. He's having anxious care for others. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Yes, his way is holy and pure. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God who does wonders. You have declared your strength among the people. You have made your arm redeem your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. I'm going to think about that. Here you see in this Psalm 77, a man who's dealing, in the middle of the night. Life has not been kind to him recently when he wrote this. He was having many, many fears and difficulties, apprehensions. He was in anxiety in a negative way, and it was pulling him to pieces. And when he wrote that, and his solution to that was to think on with the message of what the Bible has, to think on the nature of God himself. Has he changed? Is he not going to be gracious? Is he not true to his word and promises? Let's go to Philippians 4 and verse 6. What would the Apostle Paul say so many years later? What would the Apostle Paul say? Philippians, in the epistle that Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6. Citing the ESV, says, do not be anxious, MERIMNAÓ, about anything. Don't be anxious. Don't allow yourself to be pulled to pieces about anything. But in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. So if we gotta have a problem, we need to pray about it. We need to beseech God about it. And we need to let him know at the same point in time what we have been thankful for. With prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Yeah, God wants to hear them, but he wants us also, not to sit there and rail against him just because something's not going well with us now. This is life in this world. The antonyms of anxiety, just the opposites. That's what an antonym is. The opposite of anxiety is, the dictionary would say unconcern. Near antonyms, things that are close to what is the opposite sense of being in an anxious state of mind, is being calm, calmness, content, contentment, ease, easiness, peace, peacefulness, placidity. I love that's a great word. Placidiness, quiet, quietude, sereneness, serenity, tranquility, tranquilness, comfort, consolation, relief, solace. And when it's tranquil, it's, when you are in that, your mind, you're free from a state of agitation. You're free in mind and spirit. You're free from disturbance and turmoil. How do we get there? How do we achieve the opposite of anxiety? The sentiment that gets in the way and stops us from doing what we need to do, that starts pulling us apart in our emotional and mental state, making our lives miserable, keeping us awake at night. Again, as I said, forbidding us, stopping us from doing what we need to do because we're just, we can't take action. In 1 Peter, let's go to 1 Peter. Apostle Peter had this to say. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 in the English Standard Version. Peter's advice to the church, and he was writing, of course, towards the end of his ministry, but he said to all the brethren, he said, Humble yourselves, therefore, unto the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties, MERIMNAÓ, all of your anxieties, casting all these anxieties that are pulling you apart, whatever is drawing you in the opposite direction away from God, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Yet God hasn't stopped loving you and caring for you. Just like the writer in Psalm 77. He hasn't changed. He's still there, faithful and true and loving. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Let's go to John, Gospel of John, John 14, verse 27. Yes, how do we have this, the opposite sentiment? Where does this come from? Then from anxiety, this sense of being pulled apart in pieces. In John 14 and verse 27, it's written here, I leave you peace, Jesus said. I leave you peace. Now it's interesting here, the Greek word that's being used for peace is a direct word there that carries a whole sense of the Hebrew shalom. You know, when I say Shabbat shalom, Sabbath peace. It's a typical Hebrew greeting, whether for, you say shalom, you know, usually it's a farewell, but it's also a greeting. And it's typicalness, but you know, Jesus was talking about something more than just a typical greeting. I leave you peace. He's leaving us a sense of the fulfillment of what it means to be in God and to have that hope of the Messianic kingdom in the future, and the role that we, and the inheritance that he's given us as his sons and daughters. I leave you peace, and we should have that peace because of the promises that he's made, because he's still true. He's still faithful. My peace I give you, Jesus said. I do not give you as the world does. No, it's not that sort of peace, okay? You know, the peace that comes, you know, that we see in Egypt, you know, after they had their peaceful springtime revolution. No, my peace I give you. I do not give it to you as the world does. So don't let your hearts be troubled or afraid. Don't be anxious, because, you know, he's giving us his peace. He's giving us his peace. And how is he doing that? How is he doing that? Well, you know how he's doing that, don't you? Let's go to 2 Timothy, and let's go chapter 1 and verse 7. 2 Timothy, the epistle, 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. I'll read this in the Holman Christian Standard Bible. And I'll close with the scripture. It says, for God has not given us a spirit of fearfulness. The spirit that inhibits us from doing what we need to do, that keeps us from taking action in the way we should accomplishing what we should do and being what we should be. God hasn't given us a spirit of fearfulness. It's not of cowardice or timidity, but one of power and of love and of sound judgment. That's what God has given us. And of course, the spirit that he gives us is also one of peace. That's one of the great fruit of the Holy Spirit of God that indwells us. Brethren, we don't need to be anxious, being pulled apart. Yeah, we have to be anxious and concerned and have that care for each other and be that thoughtful and involved in thinking of the needs of others and those who are around us. But we don't need to have that anxious care where we're sitting up awake at night worrying about this, worrying about that. No, we have to humble ourselves under God's mighty hand. He will fulfill his promises to us, and he will take care of us. He hasn't changed his nature. He loves us. He loves you. Jesus leaves us his peace. So don't be troubled, and let's not be afraid. God has not given us a spirit of fearfulness, but that spirit of power and of love, of sound judgment.